Hi, welcome to Lesson 9, Session 3, developing, we're going to be rounding decimals today. We're going to use strategies to round the decimals when we are given a place value. So we're going to be working in our Ready Math workbook, Ready Classroom Math workbook. We are going to be on pages 177 through 182. So go ahead and go in your book to page 177. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and read the problem. It says, Tyson runs in a race at a track meet. One stopwatch shows his time as 11 and 25 seconds. Another, or 11, excuse me, not 11 and 25 hundredths seconds. Another stopwatch shows his time as 11 and 245 thousandths seconds. Round each time to the nearest tenth of a second. Okay, so what I want you to do first is go ahead and pause it and try and solve this on your own. That's always the best way to practice, is to try and figure it out for yourself. And then we will go through and do it together, and you can see if you got the same answer that I did. So go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, before I told you to pause it, I forgot to go over the important parts of the question, but hopefully by now you do know what those are. So the first question we ask ourselves is, what is this question talking about? And this question is talking about Tyson's run at the track meet. And what we want to do, what we're trying to find out, is we are supposed to round each time to the nearest tenth of a second. And I would say that that tenth of a second is super important. In fact, I'm actually going to circle the tenth of a second as important information. I'm also going to circle the 2 times that we were given. All 3 of those things are really important to make this problem happen. So now I'd like to go and show you the strategy. We're going to do 2 different strategies. So here's the first strategy we're going to try. The first strategy we're going to try is we're going to use a number line. So if we are rounding using a number line, we need to decide what to label the beginning and the end of our number line. Now, since we're rounding to the nearest tenth of a second, we need to look at the tenths in the 2 decimals we're looking at. And so in this case, we have 11 and 25 hundredths and 11 and 245 thousandths. So I know that both of these decimals are between 11 and 2 tenths, because both of them are more than 11 and 2 tenths. And then they are both less than 11 and 3 tenths. So now I can figure out where both of these items are on the number line. To do it, though, I'm going to go ahead and break up this number line into smaller parts. Right now, I've labeled this is 11 and 2 tenths. This is 11 and 3 tenths. I'm going to go ahead and break it into 10 parts. When I do that, each of these tick marks is actually going to represent 1/100th. So this would be 11 and 21 hundredths, 11 and 22 hundredths, 11 and 23 hundredths, 11 and 24 hundredths. And then right here, right in the middle, is 11 and 25 hundredths. So the way that I did that was, if I wanted to make both of these into hundredths, even though I know that they're tenths, it would be the same as 20 and 30. So this would be 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. The 11 stays the same the whole time. The only thing that's changing is the hundredths. Okay. So now we have 11, and so now we're going to figure out, where are these 2 decimals on this number line. So when we look at 11, so we have 11 and 25 hundredths, and we have 11 and 245 thousandths. So we already know, based off of our number line, what we wrote. We already know that right here is our 11 and 25 hundredths because it's on the number line. And then we know that 11, and so now we need to figure out where is this 11 and 245 thousandths? Where would that go? Well, we don't have these broken into thousandths. However, I know that it's going to be 24. We need to find the 24 hundredths, and then it's going to be halfway between the 24 hundredths and the 25 hundredths because this 5 is here. So this one here is 11 and 25 hundredths. And then right here is 11 and 245 thousandths. Now, we're not done yet. All we've done is labeled the number line. Now we're going to look and see, is 11 and 245 thousandths closer to 11 and 11 and 2 tenths or 11 and 3 tenths? Well, since it is on this side of halfway, we know it is closer to 11 and 2 tenths. So we're going to round it down. So 11 and 25, 240, oh my goodness, 11 and 245 thousandths rounds down to 11 and 2 tenths. Now, this 11 and 25 hundredths, let's look at that. 11 and 25 hundredths is right in the dead center. And remember, whenever a number is in the middle, we're looking really at that 5 right there. Remember, 5 or more, up the score. 4 or less, let it rest. So that 11 and 25 hundredths is going to round up to 11 and 3 tenths. I'm not going to go ahead and show you a second method because we will see it on the next page, and I want to keep this video on not so it's not like an hour long. So let's go ahead and go to page 178. Now on page 178, here's where we see that number line that I drew here. It says, you can place each number on a number line to see its relationship to nearby tenths. So this 11 and 25 hundredths is exactly halfway between 11 and 2 tenths and 11 and 3 tenths. So therefore, we're going to round it up. Now, this 11 and 245 thousandths is located between 11 and 24 hundredths and 11 and 25 hundredths. 11 and 245 thousandths is less than halfway between 11 and 2 tenths and 11 and 3 tenths, so that one would round down. We could also use a place value chart to compare the decimals to nearby tenths. So if we're looking at the 11s, all the 11s stay the same. So now we're trying to figure out this 25 hundredths. Is it closer to 20 hundredths or 30 hundredths? And we know since it's halfway between 20 hundredths and 30 hundredths, we're always going to round it up because it is halfway. And we're really looking at this, if this number here is 5 or more, up the score. 4 or less, let it rest. And where that's going to be important is down here. So now we're going to come down here to the 11 and 245 thousandths. So when you're rounding to the nearest tenth, you do not need to look at the thousandths place. Since we're rounding to the nearest tenth, we always look at the place value to the right of what we're rounding it to. So if we are trying to find the nearest tenth, we look at the nearest hundredth to find out what our place value is going to be. The only time we would go to the thousandth, I guess, would be if all of our hundredths were equal. So we look at our tens, they're equal. We look at our ones, still all equal. So we've got to keep going. Now we look at our tenths. We're trying to figure out, is this 2, this 2 is between the 2/10 and 3/10, but we need to look at this 4 to see if we're going to round this 2, leave it the same and round down to 20 or round it to 2/10, or if we're going to round it up to a 3 and make it 3/10. So we look at this hundredths place and we look at this 4. Is 20, actually, instead of looking at the 4, I'm going to have us look at this 24. Is 24 closer to 20 or closer to 30? That's right, it's closer to 20. So in this case, we are going to round down. So 11 and 24 hundredths is closer to 11 and 2/10. So 11 and 25 hundredths rounds to 11 and 3/10 if we're rounding to the nearest tenth, and 11 and 24 hundredths rounds down to 11 and 2/10. Okay, so go ahead and go to page 179. We're going to be looking at both pages together. So it says, look at the picture and model it. Why do the number lines and place value charts start at 11 and 2/10 and end at 11 and 3/10? And we actually talked a little bit about that on the last page. So the problem says we need to round to the nearest tenth. Both of the decimals are between 11 and 2/10 and 11 and 3/10. So therefore, those are going to be the beginning and the ending of our number line. Number 2 says, how do you know that 11 and 25 hundredths is located halfway between 11 and 2/10 and 11 and 3/10? And again, we did talk about that on the last page, but here's the reason why. There are the same number of tick marks for hundredths to the left and the right of 11 and 25 hundredths. So if we look over here, we've got 11 and 25 hundredths. To the left, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we could count this, 5 tick marks. To the right, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tick marks, which takes us to our tenths. So we can see that 11 and 25 hundredths is right exactly in the middle of 11 and 2/10 and 11 and 3/10. What are 11 and 25 hundredths and 11 and 245 thousandths rounded to the nearest tenth? Use the number line to support your answer. So, as we wrote on the last page, we recognize that 11 and 25 hundredths rounds up to 11 and 3/10, and 11 and 245 thousandths rounds down to 11 and 2/10, because we recognize that 11 and 25 hundredths is exactly halfway, so we're going to round it up. And then 11 and 245 thousandths is closer to 11 and 2/10 than it is to 11 and 3/10, because it is not halfway. How do the place value charts help you see that 11 and 245 thousandths is closer to 11 and 2/10 than 11 and 3/10? So if we're looking over here and we're looking at this model specifically, how can we see that 11 and 245 thousandths is closer to 11 and 2/10 rather than 11 and 3/10? So if we look at 24 hundredths, and then we look at the 20 hundredths and 30 hundredths, we see that 24 hundredths is closer to 20 hundredths than it is to 30 hundredths. If you're rounding to the nearest tenth, what place value do you look at to decide how to round the number? Remember, if you're rounding to the nearest tenth, we're going to look at the place value to the right to tell us what to round the tenth to. So if we are needing to round up or down to a tenth, we need to look at the hundredths place value to know what to do. Number 6 says, explain how you would round a decimal to the nearest hundredth. So the first thing we would do is we would locate the number. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in because this one's a little long. You would locate the number you're rounding between the two closest hundredths. Then you would decide if the number is more or less than halfway between those hundredths. If it is less, we round down. If it is more, we round up. You can go ahead and pause the video here to go ahead and get that all written down. And then when you're ready to move on, you can unpause. Finally, for number 7, we're going to look at what strategy, looking back at the strategies we have, which models or strategies do you like best for rounding decimals? Do you prefer to use a number line or a place value chart? Which method seemed better for you? The strategy I like best for rounding decimals it is, and then you're going to tell me that if do you prefer using a number line or do you prefer using a place value chart, and then why? Go ahead and pause the video and answer that question. All right, go ahead and turn to page 180. Number 8 says, Belinda paid $108.34 for groceries. Rounded to the nearest dollar, how much did Belinda pay for her groceries? Show your work. So if we're going to round to the nearest dollar, that 8 is in the $1 or the ones place, or in a dollar is worth 1. So we're going to round it to the nearest 1. So I know that my lower end of my number line is going to be 108 because I know that this number is greater than 108 because of the cents. So this is going to be $108. Now over here, I see that this number is also less than $109. So I'm going to make that end $109. Then I'm going to figure out what is exactly the middle between $108 and $109. And I know that the exact middle is $108.50 because 50 cents is halfway between $1, 0 and $1, or 108 dollars and 109. The exact middle is $108.50. So now I'm looking at my $108.34. I know that 34 is less than 50. So I'm not going to be exact, but I know that this number line, that this answer is going to fall somewhere about right here. This is not exact, but I do know that since I know that 34 cents is less than 50 cents, it's going to go over here. So then, is this number here closer to $108 or closer to $109? Since it's not past this halfway mark, it's not, the cents is not greater than 50, I know that we're going to round it down. So we can say that Belinda spent about $108 because we're going to round 108.34 down to $108. Now we're going to look at number 9. A dropper holds 817 thousandths milliliter of fluid. What is the amount rounded to the nearest hundredth? Show your work. For this one, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to use our place value chart. So to use our place value chart, what we have to do, if we're rounding it to the nearest hundredth, that means we want to round it to the nearest hundredth. Remember, we need to look at the place value to the right of what we're rounding to. So we're going to need to look at this, that means we're going to look at the thousandths to know what hundredth we're going to round to. So if we look at our original decimal, I'm going to write our original decimal in the middle. So we're going to write 817 thousandths. And then we're rounding to the nearest hundredth. So if we look here, this is a 1. And so we know that because this thousand, there are some thousandths, that 81 hundredths is the least number of, is the lower hundredths if we're rounding. And then 82 hundredths is the higher end. So this would be like the beginning of the number line and the end of the number line if we were drawing it on a number line. The way that I got these two numbers is I know that this decimal here is between 81 hundredths because it's greater than 81 hundredths, but it's less than 82 hundredths because there's a 1 in this hundredths place. Then I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to put in some placeholder zeros, and then I'm going to look at these 3 whole numbers. I have 810 thousandths, 817 thousandths, or 820 thousandths. Is 817 thousandths closer to 810 thousandths or 820 thousandths? Well, I know that since this 7 is greater than a 5, we're going to round it up because 5 or more up the score, 4 or less, let it rest. So 817 is closer to 820. Therefore, 817 thousandths rounded to the nearest hundredth is 82 hundredths. This one's a little tricky, but I think that you guys are going to get it. So we know that 817 thousandths rounds up to 82 hundredths. And then I'm going to go ahead and let you do number 10 on your own. Which decimals have been rounded correctly to the nearest tenth? So, oh, never mind, I'll help you. Okay, so if we've got the nearest tenth, so we're looking at 7 and 834 thousandths, and we're rounding to the nearest tenth. Are we rounding to the nearest tenth here? Well, we have a tenth, but we also have a hundredth. So I know right away that that one doesn't work because we didn't round to the nearest tenth. We rounded to the nearest hundredth. Now let's look here. Did we round to the nearest tenth? Well, there is a tenth there, so we'll come back to that because that could be it. If we round this number to the nearest tenth, does this show a tenth? No, it doesn't. So we're going to go ahead and cross it out. And then down here, this one, well, there's a number in the tenth and there's a number in the hundredths. So this is still going to say 10 hundredths. So yeah, that's not going to round us to the nearest tenth. Plus, this 115 is different than 120. So that one can't work. So let's check these other two. 10 and 56 thousandths. Is that rounded to the nearest tenth? Well, 10 and 56 thousandths is between 10 and 0/10, and 10 and 1/10 but then we need to put in our placeholder zeros and then look at the whole number. Is 56 closer to 0 or 100? That's right, it's closer to 100. So it's going to round up to 10 and 1/10. So that answer is true. Then we have 203 and 209 thousandths. So we know that 203 and 209 thousandths is between 203 and 2/10 and 203 and 3/10. Then we're going to add in our placeholder zeros and then look at these whole numbers. Is 209 closer to 200 or 300? That's right, it's closer to 200, so it's going to round down to 203.2. So this one is also true. Please, on your own, go ahead and complete pages 181 and 182. And as always, if you have any questions, you can always ask your teacher. See you soon.